Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to decode a language that's all around us, one that's hidden in plain sight, in gardens, in bouquets, even in art. We are talking about the secret language of flowers.
You know, for centuries, people have just known that flowers have this unique power, this ability to communicate things we can't always say out loud. This quote from a 19th century guy just nails it. This idea that a single flower can express these really complex emotions and thoughts that words, well, they just can't quite capture.
So what is this silent conversation all about, really? Well, it turns out there's this incredibly complex historical code hidden inside every single bouquet. It's a language that, for the most part, we've forgotten. One where a red rose is a very clear "I love you," but a yellow tulip? That might just be a polite way of saying, "Yeah, I love you, but as a friend." Ouch.
And look, this is not just some dusty old history lesson. This whole practice, it's called floriography, and trust me, it is very much alive. This was the code that helped Victorians get through their super rigid social rules. And you can see its echoes today everywhere. From modern art to, yes, online fandoms that will spend weeks picking apart the floral imagery in a music video, searching for hidden clues and secret messages.
Okay, so let's really dive into this. We're going to travel back to the 19th century, which was, without a doubt, the golden age of floriography. This was a time when a bouquet was so much more than a gift. It was a carefully written letter, a personal and, more often than not, a very secret message.
Basically, you can think of floriography as the Victorian era's emoji system. I'm serious. In a society where openly talking about your feelings, especially romantic ones, was a huge social no-no, flowers became the perfect secret messengers. They were a way you could flirt, console someone, reject a suitor, or ask a question, all without saying a single word. Kind of like how a single emoji today can say a novel's worth of meaning, right?
But this obsession didn't just pop up overnight. Let's walk through how it happened. The story really starts back in the Ottoman court with a 14th century tradition called salam, this clever game of sending messages through objects that rhymed with certain words. Fast forward to 1717, when an English aristocrat, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, sees this happening in Constantinople and writes home about it, planting the seed in Europe. But the real explosion? That happens in 1819, with the first ever floral dictionary published in France. And that book just lit the fuse, sparking this massive craze all over Europe and America that lasted for decades, with hundreds of different guidebooks all coming out, each with their own slightly different meanings.
So the main tool for sending these secret messages was something called a tussy-mussy. It was this small, tightly packed little bouquet that was designed to be held or worn. And it was two things at once. First, a super stylish fashion accessory, often carried in a fancy silver holder, and second, and more importantly, it was a physical letter. Every single flower, every herb was chosen for its specific meaning, turning this thing into a fragrant, silent conversation you could literally carry around with you.
Now, this is where it gets really fascinating, the sheer complexity of the grammar. It wasn't just what flowers you sent, it was how you sent them. For instance, if you offered a bouquet with your right hand, it could mean yes to a question, but the left hand, that meant no. And look at the ribbon. If it was tied to the left, the message was about the giver, like, I feel this way. Tied to the right, it was about the receiver, I think you feel this way. And how you wore the flowers was your reply. Pinning them over your heart was a clear declaration of love. But pinning it a bit lower, on your cleavage? That was basically the 19th century version of being put in the friend zone.
But, you know, this romantic, secret language, it had a much darker, more complicated side. It was so deeply tied to its time, which means it both reinforced and sometimes even challenged the era's incredibly strict gender roles.
Let's be real. This long-standing poetic link between women and flowers, it wasn't always a compliment. More often than not, it was a way to trap women within these symbols of fragility. Flowers were used to represent the ideal woman of the time, delicate, beautiful, pure, and, above all, quiet and ornamental.
The lily is a perfect example of this. On the one hand, the white lily was this powerful symbol of purity and innocence, famously linked to the Virgin Mary. But in literature, that same purity was often twisted to mean weakness. The lily became a symbol for the beautiful but ultimately defenseless woman, one who didn't have the protective thorns of, say, a rose.
And the poet William Blake just captures this duality perfectly in this quote. He's contrasting the modest rose, which has a thorn to protect itself, with the lily white, whose beauty is completely unguarded. It's a powerful symbol for how that society saw some women, beautiful but dangerously vulnerable.
But here's the really cool part. Women and feminist movements actively push back. They took these symbols and gave them brand new, powerful meanings. For the suffragettes, the rose's thorns weren't about passive defense anymore. They came to represent the sharp, painful, and necessary fight for their rights. And the sunflower, which always turns toward the light, that became a symbol of unwavering hope and optimism for a future where women could finally have their day in the sun.
This symbolic language was an absolute gift for artists, especially painters like the Pre-Raphaelites. Just look at this famous painting, Ophelia, by John Everett Millais. The flowers here aren't just pretty background decoration. They are practically characters in the story. You see those red poppies floating by her hand? That means sleep and death. The chain of violets around her neck? That means faithfulness, but also her early death. And the forget-me-nots? That's a literal plea not to be forgotten. Millais basically encoded Ophelia's entire tragic story right into the plants in the scene. It's amazing.
So, the Victorians developed this incredibly detailed system. But for all their talk about a universal language of flowers, was it really universal? Let's see how this language changes completely when you look at other cultures. Okay, so let's hop over to Japan, where we find this rich, totally distinct tradition called hanakotoba, which means flower words. Now, while it got really popular around the same time as the Victorian craze, its roots go way, way deeper. They're tied into ancient Japanese history, Buddhist philosophy, and the huge cultural importance of the changing seasons.
And this is where a bouquet's meaning could get completely lost in translation, or, even worse, dangerously misinterpreted. Look at this. In the West, a peony might mean boldness. In Japan, it's a symbol of masculinity, bravery, and good fortune. Or the cherry blossom. Some Western guides just list it as a good education. In Japan, it's one of the most profound cultural symbols, representing the beautiful, fleeting nature of life itself. It's like sending the skull emoji. In one culture, it means death, but in another, it just means I'm dying of laughter. Context is everything. There is no single universal flower code.
This cultural specificity is just perfectly captured in ikebana, the Japanese art of flower arrangement. And this is so much more than just sticking flowers in a vase. It's a disciplined art form where the arrangement is the message. Unlike a big, dense Western bouquet, ikebana uses minimalism and negative space. There's often a tallest stem representing heaven, a middle one for humanity, and the lowest one for earth. The space between them is just as important as the flowers, creating this deeply symbolic vision of life and nature.
So where does that leave the language of flowers today? You know, in our world of instant messages and actual emojis, is it just some quaint, old-fashioned thing? Not even close. Flowers are still these incredibly powerful symbols in our visual world. I mean, just look at these two images side by side. On the left, you've got Art Nouveau, where the flowing lines of flowers wrap around the female form to symbolize beauty and life. Now jump to the 21st century with Banksy's flower thrower on the right. The context is completely different. A protester looks like he's about to throw a weapon, but instead, it's a bouquet. The flower is transformed from a symbol of peace into an active tool of protest.
And honestly, this language lives on all around us, often in ways we don't even think about. A bride might still carry stephanotis for wedded bliss. People get tattoos of flowers to represent personal meanings, like a lotus for enlightenment. We still give red roses for passionate love on Valentine's Day, and the red poppy is still this powerful global symbol of remembrance for fallen soldiers. We're all still speaking this language, even if we don't always realize we have the dictionary.
See, once you understand this hidden language, you gain this whole new lens to see the world through. It reminds us that for centuries, people have looked to nature not just for beauty, but for a way to say the things that words just can't. It turns every garden, every bouquet, every floral pattern on a piece of clothing into a library of silent stories, just waiting for you to read them.